once more, and it's becoming a rhythm for Dr. Ben Merkle to be here. Welcome back to the Holy Land of Pensacola. Many of our students, of course, in our history of Providence have been beneficiaries of the work of New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho, and certainly his academic work as a scholar at a popular level even. And many of you have read the life of Alfred the Great. It's just a tremendous popular work meant to exalt the life of Alfred and his labors. I've told the story many times of offering an invocation for a J.D. Vance event in D.C. Some months ago, and at the end of the invocation, as I went back to my seat, an elderly man approached me, and he looked at me and he said, "You're with that school in Moscow, aren't you?" And I said, "I am." And that was Donald Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. It's remarkable how far the work of New St. Andrews has gone. There's so much to say about the influence, academic rigor, and the political fortitude of New St. Andrews, which is a rare thing in an age of academic intellectual compromise. And much of this, of course, is through the effort of Dr. Merkle. In our day, of course, it still seems rather bizarre to claim that Jesus Christ is Lord over education. But still, Ben Merkle and his tribe, they continue to press towards the upward prize of irritating the right people at the right time. And that takes a certain level of skill that is developed through a certain rigor in the academic work, but most importantly, just through good old-fashioned gospel faithfulness. We're thrilled to be connected in some small way to the good work in that far, far away land of Moscow, Idaho. And we do hope that events like this evening will continue to establish our relationship with the labors of NSA, and that we and our friendships will be strengthened in the years to come. So today, we welcome Dr. Merkle to speak on the topic of how to build schools, and I'm eager to sit under him, and I hope you are as well. Let's welcome Dr. Ben Merkle.
Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we commit this time to you. We pray that you'd be glorified. I pray that the men here would be edified. I pray we'd see your kingdom advance through all the labors that are flowing out of this. We pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
I'm on the tail end of some sort of weird sickness, so I'm going to be knocking back cough drops right and left, but I think I can. As long as those don't run out, I think I should be okay. So the exhortation I want to give is simply the charge of build the schools. I want to exhort you to build the schools. And I know that as I say that to this crowd, in many ways I'm preaching to the choir. I think a lot of you are already well immersed in that task. So I'm aware that I'm not actually talking to a bunch of people who aren't interested in this work, but hopefully this will give you some motivation to understand the significance behind the labor that you're a part of. At New St. Andrews, I would say we have a pretty good mix in our incoming students, at least in the undergraduate, between homeschooling and kids who are coming out of a traditional school of some sort, mostly like classical Christian schools, ACCS schools, that sort of thing. I would say we generally have a roughly 50-50 mix between homeschoolers and kids coming out of schools, I guess. And there's always a big comparison that's made between these two groups, because everybody has really strong opinions about whatever choice it is that they've made, and they want to have some sort of verification for, like, this is the superior method, this is the way you're supposed to do it. I'll tell you, as an administrator, as a school who's seen both of them coming in, I feel like they both do just fine. I can't give you the data that says this is the superior method. Again and again, I always see these kids are the ones that come out on top. I think you see there are certainly idiosyncrasies and stereotypes that are more often than not actually true between homeschoolers and classical schools. Homeschoolers, you have to remind them, you do have to put your name on the top of the paper. You're not turning this into your mom. But those sort of things are just funny little idiosyncrasies that are gone by the second week and really not that big of a deal. I think that you do see in kids coming out of formally structured schools, you'll see more preparedness on math, science stuff, just because they tend to have had faculty who are ready to teach at that level, and usually mom and dad aren't as good. But then on the homeschooling side, you see kids who get really adept at just cruising through books and then parents can really let them go, and so they can really go into a depth that they might not have been able to in a formal school environment. So I think you see pluses and minuses in either direction. I see strengths and weaknesses in both, but in the big picture, I think it's generally a wash. Whatever minor differences there are between them, they pretty quickly even out in the first few months of their freshman year. My family, we lived in England for 3 years during that time. We homeschooled, but our kids in Moscow attended Logos school. I'll tell you, my family were terrible homeschoolers. We were made to be inside a classical school, but I get that that's my family and not every other family out there. So if you want to hear what's the one divinely sanctioned method of education guaranteed to produce little Abraham Kuypers, you got the wrong speaker, because I can't give you that one. I think it's a question each family has to work through on their own, taking into account their unique situation. Now, having said that, that's like the big important qualification, and that established my reasonableness, hopefully, for you all, because I am going to make a really strong argument now for building the actual formal schools. But I want to take a very different angle. I'm not trying to argue that this is the superior education in all cases, because I don't see a significant difference between the final product of homeschooling versus school schooling when it comes to the individual student. However, I do see a huge difference between a community of Christians who are all homeschooling versus a community of Christians who start a Christian school. Now, you know I'm biased. I've already told you where our family goes, and maybe that bias is so strong you can dismiss everything I'd say. But I'd like to come at this question from a different angle to press you a little bit. Here's a question for you to ponder just for a moment. Pastor Brito has made reference to Moscow, New St. Andrews, and I know that you all know a little bit about Moscow. And here's my question for you to ponder. Have you ever noticed how the name Douglas Wilson is kind of synonymous with the town Moscow, Idaho? Like those two kind of go together, and they're considered virtually synonymous, at least particularly for people who are kind of following a certain theological movements and whatnot. Are there any other places like that where a pulpit and a preacher and the town are considered sort of synonymous for one another? You could use their names interchangeably somewhat. The first one that comes to my mind would be like Calvin and Geneva would be an example of something like that. But are there other places currently now that are like that, where a ministry and a town are used synonymously? I think it's actually something that's a little bit rare that we're experiencing in Moscow. And I want to go back a little bit and argue why I think that is the case, or one of the crucial elements for why that is the case. My argument is that I want to argue that the main reason for this case is that because very early on, Douglas Wilson is my father-in-law. That's the big reveal. He's my father-in-law, so I'll get that on the table now. Very early on, Doug decided to start the schools. And this was actually, I think, a really formative and very insightful move early on. Logos School was started in 1980, followed by the ACCS, which is the Association of Classical Christian Schools. It becomes this classical network of schools across the U.S. That's founded in 1991. NSA, New St. Andrews, where I am the president, was founded in 1994. Greyfriars Hall, which was the ministerial training program, was established in 1998. I was in that first class in 1998 along with Dave Hatcher. We were the first two students. And since then, now actually the big announcement is that this next year Greyfriars will come formally under NSA and will be now an MDiv that New St. Andrews will be offering. But these are all different, these academic institutions that were formed in Moscow at different points. And my argument is that the launching of these educational institutions has had a disproportionate effect on our community, and has had the result of it has been building a community-wide momentum that is uncommon, such that the town itself is increasingly identified with a church movement. Okay, it's this strange community momentum. This is preventative maintenance. This momentum in the forming of these academic institutions has created a very unique community dynamic. And I want to give two reasons why I think this is the case, or two reasons why the starting of these schools has this larger kind of community impact. First, schools provide community-wide enculturation. Okay, think about that. A school provides community-wide enculturation. And I think that this is a point that I think everybody here understands and agrees with on at least one level. Because I think this is widely understood, or increasingly widely understood in church circles, when we are thinking about playing defense. Okay? When we're playing defense, we understand the enculturation impact of institutions like schools. But I think that we forget this when it's time to play offense. We get this when we're playing defense. We don't think of it when we're playing offense. What I mean by understanding this when we play defense is that we understand the enculturation of the public school system and its hostility to the biblical worldview that we want to raise our children in. We see that public school, we see what's going on there, we see they're enculturating something I don't want, and I'm going to keep my kids out of that. They feed the kids Darwinism and tell them that they came from monkeys that got smarter rather than from their father Adam. They raise them as secular humanists rather than as covenant children. They indoctrinate kids into nonsense categories like sexual orientation and gender identity. They nurture a hatred of capitalism and propagate a cultural Marxism driven by envy disguised as justice. They essentially turn the kids against God, family, and America. And you see this happening in the school, this enculturation. You put a kid in, they're going to come out with all of those elements to their worldview. And we don't want that. And this strategy of theirs has worked very well. Right? That whole strategy has worked very well. They have built these large, powerful institutions that are impressively effective. All of these schools that are turning out, they bring in kids from all over, and then they turn out one very consistent worldview. A small little body of leftist activists has, over a number of decades, built a system that does not just replicate their secular humanist worldview with their own children, but has actually grabbed all the kids in town and indoctrinated them in their ideology. It's highly, highly effective. And whichever little Christian kids make it through that K-12 system with their faith intact, then they'll get them in college. Right? You just have to wait till they get to college, we'll get them at the colleges. And the thing that I want you to see is that that little band of secular humanists did not just build their schools for their own children. I think many of them don't even have children, right? They're not making babies. They're not building this for their own children. They built something much larger than their own family. They built something to take over their town with. These are the schools of your city. Which schools are considered the schools of your city? Who represents you? All right, you have the public school system. It has your city's name on it, and they're there to indoctrinate your children to hate your faith. Right? And you see that consistently happening. Notice that the education they're passing on is far more than just vocational training. This is really important to notice. It's not just because we tend to constantly think that education is just about passing on job skills. Education is vocational training. That's not the only thing that's happening there. They don't just give the kids job skills. They are passing on an entire enculturation, an origin story, telling them where they're from, where you came from, an eschatology, telling them where they're going, and telling them the system of logic, of ethics, of aesthetics, a political philosophy, how you think about the world, how you think about government. All of that is being indoctrinated in the school. It's all there. It's a whole worldview that is propagated through these institutions. Now, I want to say, I'm saying that, and I'm guessing almost throughout this crowd, everybody's saying, yeah, that's a concern. That's a big concern. It's a real problem. We see it, we get it, and we say, not with my kids, you don't, right? We pull our kids out. We don't let them have that kind of indoctrination. See what I mean by I say we play great defense, right? There's that enculturation. I understand the force of that. I'm going to make sure my kids don't go through that. I play defense, and I keep my kids from being subjected to that. So we keep our kids out of their enculturation. We teach them to read. We teach them basic math. We teach them to work a trade. We get them so they're employable. And that's all really great. But we are woefully behind when it comes to building our larger institutions of enculturation. Where do we build the thing that passes on what we want passed on? Where do we build the thing that grows, the worldview that we want passed on? The political philosophy, the ethics, the aesthetics, the music, the arts, the poetry, all of these fall by the wayside because we tend to focus on the immediately pragmatic. I want to make sure these employable skills, I'll get into those skills, I'll keep them out of those schools, and you'll be able to get a job and be okay. We produce little individuals with job skills, but we don't reproduce the culture of our vast Christian inheritance. We're not passing that on. And as a nation, I would say we are now enduring the consequences of having ceded the institutions of education to the secular humanists. Our culture, it's crumbling all around us, but I would say really the last 4 years, we've just seen just things you never would have thought you could have seen. I think I've referred to it here before, but I feel like 2020 was the year America stepped on a rake. And it's just been madness since then with all just insane things. And the notion that you could defund the police force and that this is going to result in peace and love and harmony. How do you think? How can you think something like that? Do you even think anymore when you come up with conclusions like that? We see our culture crumbling all around us. We struggle now to know what is the difference between a woman and a man. Right? You're not even allowed to say that there's a difference there before when it's something so obvious. Where does wealth come from and how should it be used? What is justice? What is justice? And how do you get a standard for justice that you could expect of your neighbor? What is true? What is good? What is beautiful? These are all questions that we used to be able to answer, but as a culture, we no longer are there. And in fact, to even venture a suggestion out there can get you in big trouble. Okay, it's crumbled all around us. And I think we've seen our nation crumble due to our inability to give simple answers to these questions because we haven't passed on this thing that once was there. But so what I want to say is, imagine if instead of playing defense in this fight, what if we played offense? Okay, what if it just trying to keep our kids out of their enculturation? What if we said, actually, I want to build a force of enculturation that passes on something larger. I want to build something that makes the seculars scared for their kids because this thing is strong and growing and building. Imagine if we had built the institutions that the enculturation and that was sweeping through the land, an enculturation of a robust Christian faith. Right? What if we were building that institution and it was the thing that was on the advance? I would say I've been blessed to actually see that happen in miniature in Moscow, at Logos, at NSA, where these institutions of enculturation have been there, and there's this slow growing momentum coming out of it. And this is not even a growth from evangelism, and I'm not denigrating the importance of an evangelistic growth of the faith, but I'm just talking about the growth of the people and this culture starting to fill the town. This movement from general evangelical to this much more robust vision of the Christian faith. I see families from random evangelical churches put their kids into Logos school because they wanted the education. By the time the kids graduate, their kids are theologically reformed, attending Christ Church. A few years later, their parents are attending there as well, and it starts to grow and grow and grow. I look at NSA, our incoming classes are always much less than 50% CREC. NSA is not like, we're affiliated with the CREC, but you see the incoming class that comes into NSA, it's always way less than 50%. Maybe 30% of the students are coming from CREC congregations. Look at the alumni, and it's somewhere between 80 to 90% of our alumni are off worshiping at CREC churches. We make CREC churches at NSA. We make whole congregations. This is the enculturation of an educational institution where you come in and 4 years later, we're all going in the same direction. We all want the same thing and we're ready to work together to build it. It is kind of fun seeing NSA grads find each other so that they can get together and start a CREC church because they want to build what they tasted there. When you build a school, you build an institution of broader community enculturation. You build something that helps to synchronize everybody to come together and work in the same direction. And that's why I asked that question, why do people associate the ministry of Doug Wilson so tightly with the town of Moscow? I would argue that Doug's early instinct to build schools is really at the root of it. It has, through the kindness and grace of God, been an instrument of a much larger enculturation of a town. This is not making any claims about Moscow being entirely Christianized. We have a long way to go as far as that goes. We can't even win a city council election right now. But we do have a unique presence in Moscow that's consistently recognized nationally. There's something going on with this group of people all going in the same direction. So my first argument is that building schools moves you from playing defense to playing offense, from trying to protect your kids from enculturation to building that institution of enculturation that actually grows and starts to push outward. Instead of withdrawing your kids from their institutions of enculturation, you build the institutions that they ought to be nervous about. My second argument is very connected. We should build the institutions of education simply because we should build the institutions. Okay, it sounds like a tautology for a moment, but I actually mean something a little bit different. We should be building institutions. Generally, the larger work of institution building, beyond just schools, is something that I think Christians ought to be at the forefront. We should be the ones who are leading the building of institutions. If we're leading in culture, we should be leading in cultural engagement and cultural leadership, which is where all of this is happening. But I would argue that American evangelicals really have a fear of the institutions, a fear and a pessimism about institutions. Our impulse is to resist the institution with kind of a rugged individualism. We want to be by myself. As long as I'm by myself saying what I think, that I'm authentic and I'm real. If I let myself be a part of that body, I'll be lost in that. And so we don't want to be a part of that. So we defend ourselves against that with this rugged individualism. We see institutions as bad, and we see being institutionalized as bad. Like, it's one of the arguments for why you don't put your kids in a school. They'll be institutionalized. But institutions are just what you have when a force gets large. An institution is simply what happens necessarily when a force grows large and strong. Moses and the Jethro principle. Okay, when Jethro gives Moses insight on, you've got this massive crowd of people, how are you going to lead? We need to set up a leadership. We need to set up layers of leadership so that you can actually effectively lead these people. Moses and the Jethro principle give us God's blessing on the institution and the leadership of an institution. It's the building of a faithful bureaucracy that can carry the management of a massive institution, the Israelite people. And that's what it was. Jethro was giving Moses instruction on how to build up bureaucracy. And we have, that's always an evil word in our minds, but you have to realize that if you have a large force, that's absolutely necessary. And if you're going to do it, you want to do it well. So we want to know, how do we actually lead an institution well? The whole Levitical system of worship is institutional. The rule of a board of elders is an institution. An institution is simply the structure that a movement inevitably takes on when it grows to a certain size and power. If you believe that institutional leadership is always evil, then you believe you should always be small and out of power. Okay? And that's why, again, I would say you have this individualistic pessimism that's always on defense, rather than an actual desire to grow and to advance. An institution is, as I said, this simply the structure that a movement inevitably takes on when it grows to a certain size and power. When you are small, you can rely on an informal cooperation to get along. If there's just 3 of you, you can have an informal cooperation to decide, are we going to Wendy's or are we going to McDonald's? But when you grow larger than that, and you've got a crowd of 10,000 people that you have to feed, that you can't do that with that informal structure of leadership. When you get larger, governance necessarily becomes a formal structure of leadership. And you begin to develop a government, an actual government. You develop channels of communication and policies of communication. You develop institutional culture and identity. And I would argue that evangelical Christians have a general aversion to this idea of developing an institution. American evangelicalism is highly individualistic, and also I would say pessimistic. We're very negative about our expectation about what will happen next. We have a very prominent sort of theological flavor that distrusts institutions and sees all institutions as inevitably doomed to fall to liberalism and the Antichrist. The future is all just liberalism and the Antichrist, and so anything we build, we're sure that that's just going to be taken over by liberalism and the Antichrist. I think that that's an erroneous way of thinking about what God has promised us for the future. I remember years ago, it's really funny because just a couple weeks ago, we finally built the first part of the Christchurch building that we're moving into worship into. But I can remember, this would have been in the 90s, so this is probably like 25 years ago or so, talking to a Nazarene minister, and the Christchurch elders had just begun their planning for this church building, and they'd said, we're going to take a while because we want to do something really unique and distinct and different, and we want to build this kind of quality building, and we're going to take a while to get there. And my Nazarene friend said, that's just stupid. You're just building another building for the liberals to take over. And that was just really his view. Like, if you put time into building something, the future belongs always to failure and to compromise. So don't put time into anything. Don't build something beautiful. Don't build something wonderful, because it will always be taken over by them. It was a really sad and depressing kind of outlook. We harbor an ongoing pessimism about our cultural institutions. We think that all institutions will inevitably go liberal with one generation. And we think that this is particularly true of educational institutions. Schools, we just think they're all going to be handed over to liberals. Now here's the problem, because I have to concede that if we were simply to go by the last 100 years in America, the preponderance of the evidence would suggest that this is true. Okay? If I go by the last 100 years of American Christian colleges, I don't have very much of a case to make for my position. I don't have very much evidence for my position, because across the board we've seen the vast majority of Christian colleges pooch it, and so they have all gone liberal. But I can point out that during that time, what's really interesting is how much there's a particular sort of pessimistic eschatology that has ruled the evangelical church during exactly that time when all of our colleges have fallen away. And I wonder how much that might actually have had a significant impact. And I think this is also where an education really helps, because if you go beyond the last 100 years, if we go back to the last 2,000 years, you start to see that actually the big picture is a lot more complicated than that. And actually, we do have long periods of institutional faithfulness and growth. It's actually, the last 100 years is actually the exception when we want to look at the last 2,000 years. The church has, over 2,000 years, constantly advanced through institution building. And yes, they often went apostate. They often went apostate or just kind of dead after a couple of centuries, 200-300 years. They start to struggle. But they were then replaced by new institutions, which then further advanced the gospel, or they were reformed themselves and brought back on track. And when you start to look at the last 2,000 years, what you start to see is that Christian institutions made the West. Christian institutions made the world that we live in, that enculturation that we want to pass on to our children. Christian institutions are the ones who made that. From the monasteries of Ireland, to the literacy program of Alfred the Great, to the cathedral schools, to the birth of the university, to the Renaissance, reimagining the university, to the American Liberal Arts College, we Christians built Western culture because we built the institutions of education. And when you look at history, you start to see actually a very different kind of story. However, what we have witnessed in our generation is the steady crumbling of virtually all of our Christian institutions. And I think I know why. Leading an institution as I currently am, leading at New St. Andrews, I am learning it is an extremely difficult thing to lead an institution and to hold it on its target. There is an incessant institutional gravitational pull at work against our institutions, working to undermine our mission. There's something that is going on that makes it very difficult to hold your institution on target. I'll give you a few of them. One of them is we have an evangelical addiction to niceness that replaces biblical commands with this new command of thou shalt be nice. And it utterly disarms us in many of the conflicts that we enter into. A friend of mine is the president of an Irish, he's in Northern Ireland, and the president of this Irish seminary in a denomination, a mainline Presbyterian denomination in Ireland that had gone almost entirely liberal, that he was inside of and managed to, they brought it back. So they brought a mainline denomination back to being evangelical Orthodox, and he's now the president of the seminary that is driving this movement. And I was asking him, like, how do you do that? How do you step into something that's been so liberalized and bring it back? And he said, well, it's easy. We're Irish. We like being mean. and he started talking about it a little more. And at first I thought he was just being funny, but he was explaining, like, this is actually a real thing. Because what happens is, whenever there's some sort of conflict, and an evangelical is in it, you have the conflict. Even if the evangelical wins, as soon as it's over, the conflict is over, whatever was at issue, whatever was at stake, the evangelical who wins feels bad for winning and then gives half of whatever he won back to the other guy. We win, and then we sacrifice everything that we won and we give it all back so that we gain no ground whatsoever. Because somehow we're embarrassed by our position and we don't believe it's really right. We're embarrassed in some way to actually gain ground for our position. I would say we have this constant desire to appease and split the difference. But it's interesting when you see Israel going into the promised land, how splitting the difference was a damnable compromise on the part of the Israelites. When you go to the Canaanites and you get the victory, and then you say, yeah, but we're going to give you half of this back to the Canaanites, that is something that God comes and judges Israel for. All right? If he says, this is yours, I want you to take this, you need to do that. And we don't have the courage of our convictions frequently in many of the conflicts that we enter into. On the other hand, so there's this niceness that we're plagued by, an unbiblical niceness. The other is, we do also have a cranky allergic reaction to cooperation. And so on the one hand, we're plagued by this niceness, but on the other hand, we have this cranky allergic reaction to cooperation, or a tendency to think that all cooperation is automatically compromise. And so then we just destroy every alliance of any sort. We have an inability to spot two-faced subversion of the mission. This is something I constantly see, where you'll have somebody who when they're facing you, will say, I'm with you, I'm on. But they go out and they're not with you. And you know it, and he knows you know it, but he knows that every time he smiles at you and says, I'm with you, that you have to honor it, and you're not allowed to actually call him out on the subversion. And we don't have we don't have the capacity to actually confront that and say, you know what, you're actually not with me, I'm gonna take you out. We don't know how to actually get everybody to go in the same direction and to deal with that kind of subversion. Or you see there's a paralysis when you're seeing that kind of thing. Holding on to the institutional steering wheel is actually just really hard. It's hard to steer and drive an institution in one particular direction. These things undermine the mission of an institution, and if left unaddressed, will eventually destroy the institution much sooner than you think. Okay, I've been in this position for 9 years now, which is not very long, but even in just 9 years of being president, I've been able to witness schools that I work with who one day are going in a great direction and in a very short amount of time pivot and go in a very bad direction because they've been utterly subverted by all the forces that I just described. I've seen a number of classical schools completely pooch it inside of a decade because institutional leadership is really hard. And this is a very difficult time to actually hang on to a school and keep it going in the right direction. We see these failures, we see them all around us, and we conclude that this destruction is the inescapable and immediate trajectory of all institutions. We see this as hard, and then we say it's impossible. It's therefore impossible. It's hard, therefore it just actually can't be done. It's not the case though. In reality, what this is an inescapable temptation for all institutions, but it's not an inevitable trajectory for all institutions. There are certain disciplines that you can learn to fight this trend. They are disciplines that the evangelical church, though, I would argue, has not learned. We need to figure these things out and learn how to actually lead institutions and hold them faithful over the long haul. Because the evangelical church has, I think, a pathological fear of institutional leadership. We really are not ready to learn some of these lessons. But what I want to argue, I'm telling you that we need to build the institutions. You need to learn how to run a board, how to gather a group of men, to bring them in and teach them how to govern and how to actually lead. We need to learn how to define a mission and then insist that everyone stay on it. All right, here's where we're going, and we're going to all go in that direction. And you, going off over there, you can't do that. You either have to come back on or you need to leave. And we need to learn the discipline of making those kinds of moves. We need to learn how to hire. We also, more importantly, need to learn how to fire, how to let people go who are not with us. We need to learn how to be impervious to the critiques and false accusations that are hurled against our institutions such that we are no longer steered by them. This is the thing that you see constantly, that when you have a faithful institution, there is just a little cloud of social media and blogs and whatnot that are going to start to be aimed at subverting, attacking, whatever. And all the evangelicals will be nervous, will be scared because the hint of scandal or the suggestion of these different things, they don't like that, they don't want to be around it, they can't handle the conflict. But if you have an institution that starts to do things right, you will have conflict all around you. And you have to actually develop the kind of skin that can weather that attack. You have to learn how to just not give a rip. It's one of the things that's been a strange blessing in Moscow, is because there's something, Doug is no stranger to conflict, but what it's done is create this kind of thickness of skin that's ever present, and a real attitude of just, I really don't give a rip. I know what we're doing. I know where we're going. I don't care that it makes people scream. I had a friend who was in another very prominent ministry, and he kind of moved over, got a job at NSA, and he did something on social media that caused some eruption. And he came into work the next day with this just walking on eggshells, waiting for. He was expecting to have the whole staff confront him, talk to him about his witness, his testimony, all this. And he was shocked that everybody was just it was such a non-event. Because he was explaining at my other job, I would have been brought into the president's office, I would have been on the phone all day with other board members and all this. And here it's nobody cares. You need to be able to develop that kind of ability to handle the outrage that will constantly be directed at you. We need to learn how to raise up another generation of men ready to take these positions when we go to glory. That we're training up young men behind us to pass these skills on to them such that they're ready to grab the steering wheel and keep it true and keep it headed in the right direction. I appreciate, you have the biblical qualification for elder is a man who knows how to lead his house. Okay, and that is a very important qualification. He needs to be able to lead a house. But I would say, in some ways, our bar is a little too low here. We need men who can lead their towns. We need men who can set a standard and their town starts to go in that direction because they've set certain institutional leadership expectations. And I would argue that a school is a really great place to start. The skill of starting a school and learning the institutional leadership within a school is a really good place to begin. You learn how to work with other Christians outside of your own individual congregation. It's one of the things I've loved about Logos School is that was where I can, because I'm a pastor working in certain offices, I can get so surrounded by my own denomination that I forget about all of the other Christians that are out there. And I've always loved being at Logos School where I've got these friendships that transcend certain denominational boundaries. It's a really healthy thing to be able to have that. You learn how to make hard decisions. You learn how to make something, a decision that's going to disappoint certain people, but we're going to have to go in that direction anyway. You learn what it is to command a culture, to say, okay, everybody, we're going to be like this. Okay? You establish a statement of faith. You establish a dress code. We really are all going to be like this. This is how we're going to dress. You establish certain standards of decorum. You build a curriculum. You learn what it is to discipline someone. You expel people. You promote people. But hopefully you go on from there. I'm just talking about what happens when you build a school, but hopefully you go on from there. You start businesses. You start chambers of commerce. You start media channels. You start a bank. And then somewhere in there you start stepping into city government. And you start having that kind of cultural impact. And what is great is, if you did your school well, if you built these institutions well, you now also have a whole tribe of graduates to employ in these endeavors. Or, more likely, they're the ones carrying out these endeavors as they stand on your shoulders, because you are probably dead by now. Because that's also going to happen. You're going to start building this whole thing and you're going to die in the middle of it. But you've passed on something that you've got a whole generation coming behind you that can continue building it. So we don't have to dwell on the fact that you're going to be dead by then, but you will. So build the institutions. Build the institutions. And I want to argue one of the best places is to start by building the schools. So the conclusion then, do you want to play offense or defense? Offense or defense? You already know the power of institutions, and I know that you know this because you're very careful to not let your kids into the enemy's institutions. You're aware of their power, okay? So you play really good defense. But imagine a football coach with an amazing collection of 350-pound linemen. They're all-stars, complete beasts. They terrorize their opponents. What would you think if this coach only played them when he was on defense? Okay, they stop everything at the line when they're on defense. But when they get the ball, the all-star linemen get benched and they're replaced by an offensive line that's completely terrible. Quarterback gets sacked virtually every down. Okay, if I saw that, I would think that's a coach who does not want to win, right? Why would you? What kind of strategy informs that sort of play? Well, the strategy is simply, that's somebody who doesn't want to win. If you only play defense, but you refuse to play offense, then you're somebody who doesn't want to win. And I think that we have certain elements in our theological tradition that has gotten us into this place where we don't want to win, where we don't want to actually advance the ball. And I think we need to get rid of that. So start the schools, build the local institutions, and yes, many of them will fail. Many of them will completely fall apart. Then move on, start the next one until you learn how to do it right. Let me pray, and then is there a Q&A time?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your great grace, your kindness to us. We thank you for your gospel, and we thank you that you described your gospel to us as something that advances, that's something that will cover, the knowledge of you will cover this earth as water covers the sea. Lord, I pray that we would take faith in that and that we would act accordingly. Pray your blessing on these men, on this town, and the institutions here that they will lead. Praise things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. We have 10 minutes for questions. If you have a question, stand and project, please.
Yeah,
Dr. Merkle.
You have to say it really loud because I hear nothing and I'll just make up a question.
Not so much a question, but an observation. As I talk with other people, and you're talking about subduing a culture, tribes are one of the most difficult groups to subdue. And what I hear you saying is that we need to be a tribe.
Yes.
And that type of identity is part of what needs to be at the core of who we are. And schools are the essence of starting the seeds of that tribe.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because it's more than just neighbors. It's a core relationship that is essential.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right.
And you used that word once, and I heard it in describing it, so I appreciate that.
All right, probably the dumbest person in this room, but gonna go for it. So there was a lot of, I enjoyed that very much. Institutions, we should be building institutions. I think there was something that was missing though, and I kind of want to, don't hate me, I love you, Dr. Merkle. You're much smarter than I am. So submission is one of the things I saw missing from your entire talk. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of those things I agree with, but I would push back a little bit of that because you said interdenominational friendships and the way that we build those, I think that's great. And I also would say that from the observational stance outside, you're probably more submissive to the CREC and to an authority of the church than a lot of people leading different institutions.
Mhm.
So I'm not trying to be pessimistic, and you
Yeah.
said that you thought pessimism was one of the failures of the last 100 years.
Right.
And I would agree with that, but I also would tie that with the rogue individualism of both Americans
Yeah.
and the evangelical church, because you see these Ivy League institutions like Harvard, Yale, and all them, who were Presbyterian, who were still submitting to authority much longer, who lasted much longer than the Baptist and Methodist churches that went out and had nobody to answer to except for God. So do you think there really is a place where there should be an authority in these positions?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think you're exactly right. So when you talk about governance, you're talking about a chain of authority, and you're right. I'm describing that mostly from the perspective of being the one who is leading that. But authority doesn't work unless you have everybody underneath ready to actually submit to that. And I would say the best way as a leader that you can teach submission to those that are following you is by exemplifying it in the way that you live your life to those that are above you. So for me, like when I speak to my faculty or staff, I just try to always make clear that I am in submission to the board. The board is my boss. They say jump, I say how high, and I try to demonstrate that as much as possible. But I think you see that same principle in all kinds of different ways. If you want your wife to understand your headship in your marriage, teach her what submission looks like by the way you respect the church elders, the way you talk to the governments, the way you talk to the policemen, to the legitimate authorities in your life. I think it's shocking to me, guys who are utterly defiant to every authority in their life, and then they suddenly expect deep submission to themselves. You'll have that if you're the kind of man who demands that kind of submission while not ever modeling it. You will have you'll have submission from your children as long as you're bigger than they are. And that doesn't last forever. I've learned this now. My kids are way too big. But I can still have their submission if I have their respect. And I earn their respect by showing them what kind of man I am in the authorities that I submit to. So I do think that's a big part of developing governance, is basically understanding how to biblically wield authority, which is something that has to really be earned by a lifetime of discipline and submission to God's word. You got one behind you there.
What would be your opposition to the mindset that young men should go to like a trade school rather than a school like NSA, because they're going to be able to graduate quicker and start a family sooner, unless you want to be like a teacher?
So I would say, first of all, zero opposition to a young man who says, I want to go to a trade school. I think that the colleges, you got me on a long sidetrack, but it's important. Colleges tell an absolute lie when they say that a college degree is the way to a job. And I think everybody sees through it so quickly. Colleges, the reason why they have to do that is, first of all, fills their freshman class, but also because so many colleges charge this tuition that's so exorbitant. The only way you can do it is by taking an irresponsible amount of student debt out in order to get through. And so what colleges want to say is, well, if you get this degree, it will get you this job, and this job will get you this paycheck, and then that makes it so that you taking out these loans is actually an investment. It's the only way to make a student loan look responsible, because it really, if you think about it, and all the debt that is out there, when you want to get a loan for a car, for a house, whatever, you have to qualify for it by showing how I can repay this money. Student loans, the only debt that you get by showing, like, I have no means for paying for this. If I can show you I cannot possibly pay for this, that's the one way I can get qualified for that debt. It's the most ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous debt that is out there. And so they have to recast it as this investment. So they have to attach their degree to this job, and they have to tell you that your only way to get to that job is through this degree. Okay, but I think we all see that it's just not true. That's not the way it works. So I think that the college education is something that is a fantastic investment for some people, but it's not for everybody. And I think to say that this is that everybody needs to have a college degree is just false advertising. So I would never tell a kid who says, I really feel called to this trade, and I would never tell him that no, you have to go to New St. Andrews in order to be ready for that trade. I don't think that that's true at all. I would say though, there was one thing in your question that I would push back on, which is the how soon I can get to a paycheck. I would push back on that because I want to argue that that paycheck is not the most important thing. I think what you need to do is, what you want is yourself and wise men informing you, say, what is the best way that you can be qualified and prepared to serve God at your utmost? And I think for many young men, it will be, you need to go and start figuring out how to plumb. You need to go and start figuring out how to wire a house. But for many men, it'll be, you need to sharpen your brain a little bit more at a school like this. Because I think if you have this, you're going to have far more ability to pass on this enculturation that I am describing. And that, yes, you will delay getting a paycheck, but that can be, for some, a much more valuable investment. If we think of education solely as the means to get to employment, then we've deleted this whole enculturation that I think is absolutely necessary. And we're tending to think in this really hyper-pragmatic way. Like, okay, this enculturation that you're describing, how does that get me a paycheck? You know, like, how does knowing philosophy get me this paycheck? Well, okay, go back to the last 4 years of America. How does losing that enculturation pragmatically affect a nation? How does, what happens when you have a government that shuts down all work and thinks that somehow we can still keep printing money and we'll all stay alive in some magical world where nobody has to work and somehow we're all still fed? When you lose that kind of, when you lose the enculturation that I'm describing, it's not that you just can't get a job, it's that you shut down an entire economy. It's absolutely necessary that we pass this enculturation on, but I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all that everybody needs to do that exact same thing. You will get this exhortation to the young men. I guess that's an exhortation to the older men as well. When we give young men advice about what they ought to do with their lives, we tend to, older guys, what we tend to do is we give very hyper-specific advice, and it strangely seems to match exactly the way my life worked. You know, here's the things that I did, and then somehow that becomes this cookie cutter that every single young man out there ought to do. So we have universal advice drawn from a sample size of one. And that's just not healthy. When it's a father speaking to his son, he's speaking to his own genetic material, so there actually is kind of some reason why I see me in you, and I want to give counsel to me. So I get that, but I think we have to be a little bit ready to say, I think you might be going in a different direction than what I went in, and we don't have to give them all the exact same advice. Okay, sir.
Yeah, you had a really good point when you said Christians, especially in our circles, are good at playing defense, not offense. For those who are of the homeschool persuasion here, how would you recommend those groups to offense?
Yeah.
If any.
Well, so I think that the big thing is helping them to get outside of the home. I mean, homeschooling is fun. I mean, when we had we had 5 at home, we're living in England, and it's like this, we had this little cottage out in a pasture in the Oxford countryside. You come home and it's 5 kids doing their lessons, and it's like our home was magical. But they've got to grow up and they've got to get out. I was talking to my youngest son about this a little bit ago, and I remember when I was a junior in high school, I went skiing and broke my arm, snapped it right in half, and I had to wear this cast for like 3 months. And when my arm came out of the cast, this part of my arm was just like this little spaghetti noodle all the way down because it hadn't been used for so long. And I'm talking to my son about, he's at NSA, but summer jobs, and he wants to go out and wants to test himself, wants to do the crazy things and whatnot. And basically, to be healthy, you have to have a straight bone. And that straight bone you need a cast in order to get it straight. And you want to have a straight bone. But that straight bone with no muscle on it is dangerous and it's going to break. You need to actually put muscle on it. And the cast will actually keep the muscle off. And so there's this sort of delicate balance with our kids where I want to make sure that they've got a straight bone. And that's my catechesis, that's my education, that's my teaching them what it is to be a Merkle and all this. I'm trying to make sure the bone is straight. But there's a point at which I need to say, now get out and put some weight on your bone. Go do some curls. And that means go in this place where I'm not fencing you in at all. My son, the one I was talking to last summer, sold pest control door to door in the Seattle area. It was the best thing that could possibly happen to him. It was the most irresponsible parenting thing, you know? But he comes back and he's like, I got chased by a guy trying to tase me. And he's got all these things. And it was like, and what's crazy is how much his Christian faith came alive. Because he really, truly did have to actually put muscle on. And his ability to confront his friends about their sins and those sorts of things went way up. I saw way more faithfulness out of him because he went and actually was tested like that. But it's such a balancing act to know when is the bone straight, when is it time to go out and put muscle on. And I think that homeschooling can be a really wonderful way for making sure that bone is straight. But you got to find times, especially for your sons, to push them out. And maybe in high school they need to be on the public school football team. Or maybe they, there's a number of things like that where they need to get pushed out and they need to know how to step into a world that is not shaped by the gospel and demand that it actually obey the gospel and say, this is how we're going to be. We're not going to use that language here. We're going to be like this. And that's, I'm going to cop out here and saying wisdom. Wisdom is the one that decides that.
Yeah. One more question. Two more questions. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, all right, so I'm going to have to read. I'm not giving that to challenge you. I'm the smartest person in the room. You mentioned as we as evangelicals don't have the courage to stand our ground when we should advance from one battle to the territory and to the next side of the battle, and while fortifying the one territory. So I guess, do you feel that this is partly due to the churches that claim to be evangelical, such as like NAR churches and the whole progressive Christianity movements? Do you feel like that is creating, we're fighting secularism and progressive Christianity? Because if we as CREC are focused in one direction, there's hundreds of thousands of millions of followers of this progressive Christianity that are contrast to our beliefs. And so how do you establish that institution to fight both fronts?
That's a really good point. And I think that I mentioned you have a lot of times when you're trying to lead, there's a two-facedness. There's somebody that says they're on your side, but they aren't really. That's that progressive, the progressivism that you're describing. And then what will happen is then you'll have a soft-hearted evangelical who will take them at their word and say, we have to go in that direction. And so you have two different things that you're dealing with. With one, what you need is clear teaching. You need to regularly teach them. With the other, I think you just need bold defiance. We're just not going to do that. One of the ways that I'll give you an example of how I see this playing out. In our stance for a biblical sexual ethic, you'll notice that one of the things that's constantly flipped against us is, well, you're a Christian, you serve a God of love. God is love. And so this is love. How can you be against that? And that's the progressive line. And then you have a soft-hearted evangelical who's genuinely torn by that. Yeah, I am supposed to be loving. And when I say these things about homosexuality, it's hurtful. And I shouldn't be hurtful because I'm a Christian. And so this person needs to be taught. This person needs to be defied. And I think that the trick is, on that question, the thing that I keep seeing is, yes, God is love. God is love. God and his character defines for us what love is. God is the standard of love. His word describes for us what is loving. His word says that is abominable. So that's not love. His word describes what love is. But what they have done is they've flipped it on us and they've said love is God. The Bible says God is love. They flipped it to say love is God. Love is God. Whatever I feel in my heart is love, and love is God, so this is divine. And my relationship with this other man is a divine thing, that Christians can't question. That's the move they make. We need to teach our people, no, God is love. He defines this. And then help them to understand. But this person over here, we need to not have our conscience bound by their screaming. I need to not feel bad when I defy them, because they're defying the living God. There was another. Yes, sir.
What do you think the relationship between denomination and school should look like? Personally, I'm an infant in the Series C, relatively speaking, and I see the model, this like the Fort Worth Providence and other churches that I've been to in Denver, California, whatnot, with Series C, and how they have relations with the elementary, middle, and high schools, and as well as what you have with NSA up in Moscow. But then also kind of as the gentleman in front alluded to, where you have like colonial America, where a lot of the schools are found, the universities, kind of like under direct like Puritan control, oversight. So do you think your model is a more effective, efficient way of doing it, where there's a little bit of separation, where it's not quite as like direct?
Yeah, so, okay, that's a really good question. And I would say, I'll describe what I think are my preferences and where I see wisdom being. I can't draw a thou shalt not out of Scripture on some of this, but this is what I think that the more clear and specific you can be in your doctrinal convictions, allows you to speak more honestly and truthfully. And you can, once you've established a center, you can, like if you establish, here's the center of our circle, you can always establish different concentric rings of fellowship moving out. So for instance, at NSA, NSA can be really clear, here's what our board needs to hold to. And then we're also really clear on faculty and staff. So at NSA, if you're on faculty or staff, you're theologically reformed. You have to say the Reformed creeds are the best expression of the Christian faith. And you have to be attending one of the local Reformed churches. And that establishes a certain like-mindedness in all of us. But then you can also say, and we do with our students, we say, you just need to be an evangelical Christian. And we want to know you're going to an evangelical church. You don't have to be Reformed to come to NSA. You will be taught from a Reformed perspective, and you need to be okay with that. But you don't have to sign on in order to be at NSA. And so what that does is it allows us to have a clear, like, this is our conviction, but there's room for argument and all of that, which I think is really healthy. As well as it kind of establishes, I mean, it's sneaky because basically what's going to happen is kids who aren't Reformed are going to show up, and after 4 years, they're going to be generally kind of moved in that direction. That's usually what happens. If it started to not go in that direction, I would want to change how we fence things. Logos School was originally established by a cooperation of churches and never established one clear church leadership. It's worked out for them, but I think that what we have at NSA is a little bit better. So Christ Church has a clear prominence and ownership of the vision of the school and has influence over the board and things like that. And it establishes this nice clear center. And then once you have a clear center, you can have a wide range of boundaries for your fellowship. I know at NSA, we don't take, if you're Catholic or Orthodox, you can't come to NSA. You have to be an evangelical Protestant. I know schools that would be wider than that. I don't think it's wrong. I think that's a totally viable thing to do. I even know schools that will say, you don't have to be a Christian, but this is what we are, and you have to be ready to go with that. I think you can get away with that, and I think that, not get away with it, I think you can do that well. I think that's possible to do that well, and it becomes an evangelistic kind of thing. But I think that can get away from you. And all of a sudden now, the non-Christian kids are evangelizing the Christian kids, and the trajectory is in the other direction, and that's not good at all. So it's kind of a wisdom mix, but I think it's best to have a really clear established center, and then you can have gradations of fellowship moving out.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.